Now here's Gustav Mahler communicating with Bruno Walter briefly. I often wondered why John Wiener's, and of course, so those who know should, first meeting. Memory goes back to my first meeting with Mahler. I was only 18. In June 1894, first performance of First Symphony, called to Titan, at festival, etc., and so forth, called forth a howl of indignation from musical press. Critics poured the vials of their wrath on a work at once sterile, trivial, and monstrously extravagant. In particular, the funeral march, etc., and so forth, was dismissed with irate contempt. The excitement with which I devoured the notices comes back vividly. I marveled at the singular courage of the unknown composer of the march, and ardently desired to know the man responsible for so extravagant a work. A few months later, I got an introduction to Pollini, recommending me for the post of coach at the Hamburg Opera, where the same Gustav Mahler, whose work had so excited me, was chief operatic conductor. As I came out from my first interview with Pollini, there he was in the office of the theater, small in stature, pale, thin, the lofty forehead of his long face framed in blue-black hair, and behind glasses, remarkable eyes, lines of sadness and of humor furrowed in a countenance across which an astonishing range of expression passed as he spoke to the various people round him. Here was the incarnation of Kreisler, the arresting, alarming, demonic conductor envisioned by the youthful visions of E.T.A. Hoffmann's fantastic tales. With friendly kindness he inquired of my musical qualifications and capacity. To his apparent satisfaction I replied with a mixture of modesty and self-confidence. He left me bemused and perturbed. Having grown up in a middle-class environment, I had looked on genius as something that existed in books and scores, and the thrill of the concert hall, the theater, the art gallery, whereas one's fellows were likely to be commonplace and real life dull. Now, higher spheres seemed open before me. Mahler in aspect and gesture seemed at once genius and demon. Suddenly life took on a romantic quality. I can cite no stronger evidence of the electric current of his personality than the swiftness with which his impact transformed my entire feeling about my life and my attitude toward it. My next memory of him is of the rehearsal of Hansel and Gretel, then going into production at the Hamburg Opera. Never had I encountered so intense a human being. Never had I dreamed that a brief, pungent word, a simple, compelling gesture backed by absolute clarity of mind and intention could fill other people with anxious terror and compel them to blind obedience. An inadequate piano accompanist exasperated him. Suddenly, oh joy, he saw me standing in the wings and asked whether I could take the risk of accompanying the prima vista of an opera I did not know. My proud, of course, produced a smile of amusement. A wave of the hand dismissed my unhappy colleague and set me in his place. Now in the forest scene, the repeated chorale echo was poorly done. He turned to me saying something like, I rely on you to know what goes on in the forest. Work out the echoes. His first rehearsal gave me the real impression of his method of working. He led, he commanded, he steeped in the spirit of the work. He knew precisely what he wanted to achieve. Brusque, harsh, with weakness or inadequacy. He was kind and sympathetic wherever he recognized talent and enthusiasm. My third recollection of our meeting, we were coming off the stage. I was about to take my leave when he stopped me and said, walk a bit of the way with me. Our talk, I recall, only that it began with a remark about his Tinderlex work, which he said was masterfully executed, but not really a fairy tale. From the nature of the fairy tale, he went on to other topics. It fascinated me to find the same intensity and high intellectual pitch in his talk as it was his rehearsing. The violence with which he rebuffed my insufficient remarks, how shyly I made them, his sudden plunge into reflective silence, then the friendly glance with which he picked up sensible observation, the unexpected twitches of furtive pain across his face, even the curious irregularity of his walk. Now he would stand, now stand stock still, now rush ahead. All this confirmed and strengthened the impression of someone demonic. Indeed, I could hardly have been surprised if after we had taken leave, he had flown off in the form of a vulture. A fourth picture completes my first impression. Mahler had bidden me to visit him. As I walked into his workroom, my eye was caught by a reproduction on the wall of Concerto Who, I asked myself, was this monk with his hands on the keys who seemed to be interpreting his play and turned to face me? Who was he to do with Mahler, and whom did he so strongly resemble? Then I realized that for a long time I had been unconsciously seeing Mahler in my mind as the reincarnation of the aesthetic music maker in the picture. Actually, there's a family resemblance here, and not Mahler only. Somehow, every genuine musician resembles the monk, if no one else so much as Mahler. Here is a miracle. A genius of the brush with a prophetic foresight, prophet to genius, as he had created the typical musician, created him, not built him up out of pieces of knowledge. In his time, music as we understand it did not exist. Thus, the image of a musician was created in advance of music. This picture gives the point of departure for our talk. Whenever we touched on the strain-free vision, I do not remember, but I do recall our often speaking about it later. I also know that Mahler's likeness to the pious player enhanced my sense of the mystery prefigured in the 15th century portrait. On this or perhaps my next visit, I at last worked the conversation round to his creative work and persuaded him to sit down at the piano. Then everything I was capable of feeling and understanding was fused into one single tremendous impression. Then the Tyrol music was given a thrilling insight to the soul of creative artists. Small wonder then that I began to have a share in the recreative work of a conductor who could penetrate to the very soul of great works and enrich anyone who worked with him by revealing through example and precept a universal significance. My spiritual experience literally went to my head. There, that I had not lose my head entirely, was owing to the boundless devotion and reverence I felt for him. I was ready without reflection or even looking forward or back, simply to follow him, to feel and work with him. Since such an attitude was as natural and congenial to me as were Mahler's music and music making, I luckily nevertheless lost myself in my devotion. Years later, at the cost of grave soul-searching, I had to break away from his influence. But I say today, as I felt then in the very depths of my being, that his influence was a blessing on my whole life